Welcome to the James Rice Show, a humorous, entertaining, and sometimes thought-provoking look at teaching and studying abroad. Join the conversation as James guides you through his experiences and provides insights into how to improve your English and how to improve your teaching of English. And now, here's the man you've been waiting for, James Rice.
Coming up on this week's episode, an exclusive interview with former Australian immigration official Andrew Durston, featured in the controversial international student documentary Cash Cows. Don't miss this episode of The James Rice Show. Hello, students and fellow educators out there. Welcome to the James Rice Show. I am James, broadcasting from Toronto, Canada, with our lovely producer Stephanie here. And I'm very pleased to bring you this special, exclusive interview with Andrew Durston, who appeared in the controversial Australian documentary Cash Cows. And this documentary is talking a lot about the university admission process, English Waiver system, where English is waived and students can enter university without showing their level of English, and a number of other big problems that are going on out there. Andrew Durston is going to come on to the show. He is actually a CEO of a company called Probitas Quad, which is quite fascinating. It's quite a fascinating company because he understands that some of the issues universities are facing is that there's a lot of applicants, and it's hard to know which applicants are good, which applicants are bad, and which applicants, well, are fake. And he's seeing things like transcript fraud. So the transcripts that they're giving from universities or for postgraduates, they're fake. Work experience fraud. So they're saying that they work at certain jobs, but they actually don't. He's also advocating, and he's in favor of doing video interviewing of students, which we've talked about here on the James Rice Show, as well as digital portfolios. He thinks that's the wave of the future for university admission officers. And we've talked about that as well. And we also discuss, this is quite fascinating for university students out there and agents and people, not university students, but high school students going to university, anyone really going to university, is that they actually check your social media. Yeah, they're checking your social media accounts. And he's going to talk a little bit about why they're checking your social media accounts when you're applying to university. So we've got a wide-ranging conversation with Andrew Durston. But first, I want to play you a little clip from the documentary Cash Cows and give you a little bit of background of why this has been so controversial in Australia and why it's important in Canada, America, the UK. They're shining a light, this documentary is shining a light on some serious questions and serious problems. And Stephanie, let's play clip number one from the ABC Australian Broadcasting Company documentary Cash Cows.
Australia's education industry is booming.
Australia was the ideal place for me. I love this place.
It's now our third largest export behind iron ore and coal.
Australia is one of the most successful international educators, particularly in its universities, in the world.
Universities are admitting foreign students in record numbers.
How do you think universities view international students?
Look, of course, they are the cash cows. There is no doubt about it.
But there's another story behind the success.
How frequently are universities waiving English language requirements?
I would say that it's not all universities, but there are definitely large numbers of universities still which waive English language requirements.
Admitting students who don't have the right prerequisites or correct language capabilities is setting them up for failure. this is just not what a university should do. That's not what education is about.
I was getting large piles of folders with academic misconduct cases in them, and the numbers just kept going up and up and up, and so I started to ask people what's going on.
I think it's a train wreck. I think it's coming, and it's coming hard, and the incoming government's going to have to deal with some pretty serious welfare concerns.
And that last voice you heard was of Andrew Durston, who will be joining us in a few minutes. And I do want to give you a little background on Andrew. Andrew has been involved in public administration for the past 32 years. He has spent 27 years in immigration policy, operation systems, and risk in intelligence for the Australian government. Now, he was in 2010. From 2010 to 2013, he was the principal migration officer for the Australian High Commission in New Delhi, India. And he was also the director of returns and removals in Canberra, Australia, in 2013. And as well as he worked on, I guess, the returns and removals policy for the Australian Department of Immigration and Border Protection for the last couple of years, 2015 to 2017, and from 2017 to now, he co-founded Probitas Quad. Now, Probitas Quad, you can find the description and the link in our description of the podcast below. And what you'll find is that Andrew is looking for solutions. Now, the documentary is quite controversial, and it is no doubt sparked a lot of issues and sparked a lot of conversation in the higher ed world, especially in Australia. But it should also be noted that the documentary also should be viewed from a Canadian perspective, from an American perspective, from a UK perspective. So check it out. It's called Cash Cows, and it is on YouTube. You can find it, Cash Cows Australia. You'll find it. It's also, we posted it on our Facebook page, James Rice Show. So check that out, and you'll get a better sense of what the documentary is talking about. Now, the documentary is, negative about the Australian immigration system. I mean, it's called Cash Cows, which means, they're looking at students just like money. But Andrew is looking for solutions. And as we are here on the James Rice Show, we don't always just attack people. We want to find ways to improve the lives of international students. We want to find ways to help make the experience of being an international student better for all of the students around the world. And I think Andrew wants to try to fix the issues that are running between governments, between universities, and between education agents and students. And his Probitas Quad company is looking for a way to make sure that the best qualified students get into the universities that they want to get into, and the universities and the governments of the different countries can feel confident that when the student is coming in, that they are socially ready, that their English level is ready, that they can contribute and make a positive contribution to society. Because let's face it, the majority of international students are good, hardworking people. And there are, of course, always in every group, there are a percentage of people that are bad and looking to cheat the system. And, I think what he's trying to do is make sure that those people do not get through, and help the universities in blocking those people, as well as making sure if they get through that they are well deserving and well qualified. So we're going to have our interview with Andrew Durston coming up next.
The Study It textbooks are the first ever completely digital and interactive English as a second language textbook series. Once downloaded, these textbooks do not require a Wi-Fi connection. Students and teachers can use them anywhere, anytime. Used in over 40 schools, universities, and NGOs worldwide. Study It is the future of English teaching. Visit www.studyitbooks.com for more information.
Welcome back to the James Rice Show. I'm very pleased to welcome from Australia, Andrew Durston, CEO of Probitas Quad. And he was actually in the Cash Cows documentary. And welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thanks very much, James. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
So I'm going to start by asking you about your opinion of cash cows. That's gone on out there. I mean, how do you feel the presentation of the show was?
Well, I'm relatively happy with the way I was portrayed, of course, and some of the issues that it raised. I think there's far broader issues, and I think it did focus on one particular university, which I must say I wasn't aware that was a university that was going to be targeted by the program when I was involved in my interview. But I think in broad terms, it brought to light some significant issues around some of the challenges in recruiting international students into Australia. And I think some of that, what came through was echoed across the industry, not just within the show, but after the show. I know some of the industry were not happy with the show, but I think there are some deep-seated issues, and they have to be addressed.
Now, many of the universities are saying that this is not a widespread problem. I mean, is this true?
Well, I can't comment for all universities, but I must say my experience, and I deal with the issues of student credibility in the application stage through our business. We're seeing significant issues in the quality or the characteristics being presented by our students. Now, that may be because we're in that business and our university clients are sending us those applications that they have real concerns about. But on the other side, it's the people I talk to in Australia, in the industry, whether they're lecturers, whether they're admission directors, they're telling me that they're concerned about a number of these issues. So, and sort of anecdotally, talking to other parents of university students, a number of the issues that came out in the program are, absolute issues for those parents and their student children.
One of the things that jumped out at me was the English Waiver. How widespread is that? Because honestly, Andrew, I, as many listeners know, I work at a high school here in Canada, and I have seen students get accepted into Australian universities that would not be accepted into Canadian universities, and their IELTS scores are generally not high enough.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is the crux of the issue, and my experience tells me that the higher you put your English requirement, the better quality of student outcome and academic outcome will be achieved. And really, if you wanted one single characteristics which is going to give you the best outcome as a generality, English would be it. And I put this to government reviews, 8-9 years ago, that if you drop the English standard, that's probably the biggest concern in terms of outcomes that are going to be achieved. I think, James, that in the latest iteration of Australian international student policy, the universities and the institutions were quite clear to government that government shouldn't be assessing or setting the English entrance requirement. It's the universities that should be setting that for their own courses. And that's fine, but I think what we're seeing is where you reduce that, or where universities reduce that English entrance requirement, the issues that came out of the cash cows program become self-evident. It's not fair to the students who come with limited English capability to enter into what are often very difficult courses for, fluent English speakers. So they're at a, significant disadvantage. So I think, English as a single entity or a single characteristic is possibly the most important element. I know a lot of academics and universities would disagree with me there, but my experience tells me that that's the one issue that if you get that right, you're halfway there, if not, 3/4 of the way there.
Is the Australian government a stakeholder in a number of universities, or are they private universities in Australia? Or is it a mixture?
The majority of universities in Australia are funded through the federal government, in the sense that for whatever and for educating Australian students who pay a much lower fee for their courses than, say, an international student does.
Okay, so it's similar to Canada. We're in the similar situation where we're kind of a public-private combination. In Canada, the issue is, what we're hearing is universities are trying to recruit international students around the world, but of course it's very competitive with all of the countries trying to recruit, and they're spending money going overseas, going to different countries, recruiting, and then getting their visas denied. And I guess the reaction by some universities is, in order to get that cash flow, they've got to lower the standard of English. Whereas in Canada, they're trying to maintain that standard of English, but they're struggling to recruit now because either the visas are not being approved, or families do not have the income to come to Canada.
Okay, so that sounds like an issue around, what's the appropriate policy setting for attracting international students. Now, what's the motivation for behind the policy? And I think most universities and countries would say, well, we want to increase the diversity of our classrooms. That's a good thing, and there's usually a financial element to it. I think a number of countries publish the economic value of an international student program. There's education services, and those two factors generate the policy. They don't really connect or bring in the student motivations. So what are the motivators behind international students seeking, a particular country? And
what are you finding in Australia? What is that motivation?
Well, the international students aren't a homogenous group, of course, but in general terms, when you want to grow your international student program in countries which are developing, China, India, Nigeria, you name it, Pakistan, there seems to be a band of the very, very top students who will select their destination country or their university basically on rankings and ability to do research, and high quality research. But below that band of students, you've got a very large number of students who might be looking for a high class education or a top quality education, plus some post-study work in a related field, and others who might want that as well as a migration outcome. Some might just want the migration outcome, and we saw the folly of lowered standards that led to large numbers of low quality, academically academically low quality students coming to Australia for a migration outcome 10, 12 years ago, and cause all sorts of issues for the students themselves and for the industry. So I think you have to be careful that when you craft an international education policy, that you bring together, all the component parts of that policy, in a sense that there's nothing wrong with having a policy that seeks to bring in overseas students, educate them, put them to work in the workforce, whether it's for a short period of time or a longer period of time, as long as it's meeting the needs of the country and the students. You get that happy balance. What I've seen, I think, has been a too great a priority on the financial aspects and countries looking at, well, this country has grown its international student base by this much, and it's got this many billions of dollars in foreign earnings. I'd question some of that, some of those statistics, and I'd question some of those economic outcomes, because unless you understand who's coming, for what purpose, and what motivation, and what their ultimate outcome that they seek, you can't put that coherent policy together.
Yeah, and I agree. I think in Canada, that is what many of our government officials are looking at, the money that is coming into the universities from international students. But sometimes those students, they don't necessarily have the money to survive while in country. And we have an incident right now where a young student was removed from the country because he was working too many hours. And frankly, he just didn't have enough money to live. He spent all of his money to get here and to get into university.
Yeah, so I think this comes back to your policy settings, and and that will be usually given effect by some immigration rules around the grant of a visa. And if we accept that you're going to charge a foreign student a large amount of money to in tuition fees, and then for them to move themselves from particularly countries with a lower cost of living to a country like, Canada or Australia with a high cost of living, the amount of money that student needs available to them is very significant. And how do you ensure that they have that amount of money available to them? Yes, you want them to have a part-time work right, and that's what it should be, a part-time work right. But if that student is funding their tuition and their living costs from their earnings within your own economy, that is not a foreign, income for the country. It's an education that's being funded from within your own economy. And how can a foreign student, work enough hours to, fund their tuition and fund their living costs from work in your economy? The numbers don't add up. So how do you ensure that those students who are coming in have access to adequate funds? And that becomes a visa application issue often, or it's ignored and the student comes without the necessary funds or access to necessary funds and finds them in the situation that you've just described.
And do you think Australia is doing a good job with this?
I think in some elements it is, but in others not. And in terms of the program that, the Cash Cows program, I raised significant concerns around the number of students that were coming from Nepal. And the reason I raised those concerns is the numbers have spiraled significantly, and some of the statistics that were presented in the program only talked about the last few years. If you go back 8 or 10 years ago, our country, our office was granting about 700 visas a year for university admission students from Nepal. It's a relatively poor country, and it has a high reliance on remittances from its workforce going overseas and remitting funds back. We got to the stage where I think last year there were 20,000 visas granted to Nepalese students.
Wow!
Again, yeah. And then we had a department concerned, a visa department concerned about a 63% growth rate in this year from that. So that is alarm bells to me, and the alarm bells that I'm concerned about is the welfare of those kids that are coming to pursue education.
Right. Yeah, and we're certainly seeing that from India and some of the other countries that we're bringing over. I guess the question is this a government policy issue that needs to be solved, or is it the universities who are trying to attract these students because they need the money to expand the university or to make up government funding cuts that are happening, or is it a combination of both?
I'd say it's a combination of both, James. It just how can this many students come from places where you then see the welfare issues that emanate, and whether it's within the academic area or whether it's outside, whether it's working long and many hours during the week. At the crux of it, it's a welfare issue for students. And yes, I think the desire to generate income from foreign students is a very attractive thing to universities. That's fine, provided their academic standards are maintained and the economic outcomes that are looking to be achieved can be achieved in a sustainable manner, and I mean sustainable for the students themselves.
Do you think the universities and the government officials are communicating together well, or not at all?
To some extent, I'd say not at all. I raised an issue about that in India a couple of years ago, where my previous experience had been that the visa officials would meet with any university representative that came through while they were doing their marketing or recruitment or enrolment roadshows, and discuss what was being seen in the student visa caseload. My advice has been that 2 years ago they no longer talk to those representatives. They only talk to agents or agent bodies, and I have some significant concerns around that approach, because I think we had a situation when I was in India where one of our universities, Australian universities, really didn't have control of their recruitment program. They had possibly more than 400 agents on their books, sending in all sorts of applications, which by the time they were offered a place and reached the immigration office, we were refusing, something like 90% of those applications. A short discussion between government officials and the Vice-Chancellor laid out what the issue was. Within a few short months, they had invested effectively in their contract management, their some significant agent rationalisation, and putting a real effort and team and resourcing into identifying and assessing the credibility of the applications they were getting, such that they were making far fewer offers, but their visa approval rate was getting close to 100%. they'd invested in assessing credibility like an immigration department would if they had the full resources to do so. And I think they were very happy with the outcome that they achieved there. They ended up, I think, attracting more students, but the students that they attracted were much higher caliber, and they were getting visas and they came through. So when I hear institutions talk about, oh, we've got a visa problem with our overseas students, I suggest that they don't have a visa problem; they have a recruitment problem, and they have an assessment problem of the credibility of the students they're attracting. If we take the position that the policy settings are correct.
And you have created Probitas Quad to help with this process, correct? To sort of automate and digitize the admission process for universities. Is that correct?
Well, I would say, first of all, our reason for being is to provide an independent credibility assessment of the student, not to take on the enrolment or the recruitment process, but for those client institutions, we will do an assessment against pretty much the visa requirements before an institution was to, or either before they make an offer or if they make a conditional offer. And we then get in touch with the student applicant and, go through their identity, their financials, their academics, their English scores. We then look at interviewing them, recording that interview, developing a report to the admissions team that says, on the basis of our assessment, this student is likely or unlikely to get a visa. Your call now as to whether you wish to continue to enrolment or not, and we do that, for a simple fee rather than a commission. So we're not, we're not trying to manufacture a particular outcome.
So you're helping break down that the numbers. I've seen numbers of in the thousands that some of the top universities are getting, and you're trying to break that down, which is one of the issues that I guess that are facing university admission officers is there's just too many applicants.
Yeah, well, what I find is that if you want to develop integrity into your recruitment and enrolment system, you have to invest in verification and credibility assessment. And when you do that, it sends a very clear message to the market that this is a university, this is an institution that values student credibility, above all else before it makes an offer. And then you find that while you have to invest up front in that integrity of your process, you may find that the number of applications you get drop, but the quality of the application goes up significantly. The market finds out that, this institution's using these guys and they do a full assessment. And if agents or individuals perhaps won't gravitate to those universities that don't look at the credibility of the student as closely.
And you're using Probitas Quad or offering Probitas Quad right across the world, not only Australia. I mean, Australia is obviously your first market, but you're looking to expand that, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We just entered a joint venture agreement with a global company called VFS Global, and we're just rolling out now a global offering so that institutions in any particular country can access our assessment capabilities, as well as another product, James, which is really a visa support, visa application support service, where we assist the students who have been offered places who the institutions consider are worthy of going to visa application stage. a service that the university pays for or the institution pays for rather than the student, to minimise those avoidable visa refusals, making sure that they've got all their documentation in place, making sure that they understand the reason why they're going to a particular course that they're going to. I mean, if they don't have that, then they're not a credible applicant, and we would, recommend to institutions that they perhaps reconsider the offer. But that's another element, particularly in the direct applications space. So we don't see ourselves replacing high quality agents that institutions use and contract with, but we see increasingly that students around the world are, have greater access to information and are making direct applications themselves to institutions, and that brings in a new level of risk to the institutions. Who's on the other side of that electronic application? How do they know that the information that's being presented to them is credible and genuine?
And one of your offices, or your first office, I believe, was set up in India. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. To just verify that and make sure they're genuine. Correct.
That's right. And we've had some very interesting outcomes from some of the work we've been doing there, and this is why I would be at odds with some of the institutional responses to the cash cow program. Is
so what are you seeing? What are you seeing in India?
Well, from what's been sent to us, we've seen a number of students who have poor English, surprisingly, particularly in applications for postgraduate work. So, if you talk to a student and you say, okay, I'm going to interview you about your application for your postgraduate master's in whatever, finance maybe, and they ask you, can we have the interview in local language, please, because I'm not very good at English. That's an alarm bell straight away. We see that a bit. We've seen a significant amount of academic transcript fraud. So we've done some work for a few universities, and we've uncovered a number of fraudulent or counterfeit degree mark sheets and transcripts. So that's concerning. We see, again, in the postgraduate side of things, fraud or misrepresentation in work experience, where that work experience is expected and required as part of course entry. It's that these issues aren't going away, and I think institutions put themselves at risk, both reputationally and financially, when they offer places to students who either are complicit or ignorant of what's going into their application.
I'm curious about the transcript fraud. So in terms of India, I'm assuming the students are sending their transcripts, by PDFs or by paper into admission officers. Is that correct?
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
There's no government digital resource in India?
Not as yet.
Okay.
The Indian government had been planning to digitise and had actually required individual states to move to digitising their academic transcripts. You can verify a school transcript electronically, but a university transcript, it varies. But there had been a push a couple of years ago to digitise the entire holdings in India, but that hasn't progressed as quickly as I think it was initially intended.
One of the ideas that I've talked about with admission officers and recruiters and people who have come out of the U.S. college admission scandal was more video interviewing and digital portfolios, especially when offering scholarships or perhaps even into the post-grad market where the numbers are a bit more manageable. What do you think about ideas like that are being floated around?
Yeah, well, we're doing that already. So
great.
The idea of a recorded video interview and transcripting that for universities, for institutions is it's a higher level of service, but it makes it very clear to anyone that then opens up that file and has a look at the interview, the outcome, and gives I think a good admissions officer or a good credibility assessor will know within about 5 minutes of talking to someone what the outcome that assessment's going to be. It's not the easiest thing to bluff your way through a video interview. I remember a circumstance of the previous policy assessment for Australia back in, I think it was about 2010, 2011. A former senior government minister had been appointed to undertake a review. He came through our office in India and we showed him how we interviewed students over video link. And he watched over the shoulder of one of our staff interviewing a prospective student. And it lasted about, all of 15 seconds when the student at the other end couldn't actually tell the officer the correct name of the course that they were applying for.
Yeah. So what percentage of in your service, what percentage is being used for video right now? I mean, I'm assuming it's still fairly new.
Yeah, we're fairly new, and we're just developing our capability in that regard. But things like Zoom, things like and with our tie-up with VFS, their global footprint is something like 2,800 visa application centres around the world. We'll be tapping into that geographical footprint. We won't be using, obviously, other countries' visa application centres, but we will be using some of the infrastructure that they have to undertake, a biometric enrolment check, undertake a recorded video interview, and then develop, our credibility assessments based not only on that but on verification of documentation. And I think this is the importance of the credibility interview, because as I explained to one university who became a client, they were very concerned about us being able to verify academic transcripts from far-flung places or small villages or wherever they may have been, third, fourth tier town cities. And I explained to them, look, it's great if you can verify a document, but in a sense, that's only really useful if you can verify definitely that it's not genuine. What's more important is if the person can tell you the story that makes sense and corroborates what's in the claimed transcript or their English score or their financial situation. If they can corroborate that in a discussion with the ability to assess people as to their truthfulness and that sort of thing, far more powerful and informing.
No doubt. Do you think that that there's any place for digital portfolios in the near future? So students, I know that many of the universities, want to see some sort of letter or an essay of what they've done. but is there an opportunity for digital portfolios, do you think?
Yes, indeed. I think things are moving fairly quickly in that regard, and like any source of information that becomes, whether it's manual or digital, the value in that will come down to the actual credibility of the data source. So if you have trust in the source of that data, then that data becomes very valuable for the student, for the institution, for whoever's looking at it. And we're certainly working on a range of opportunities and services that will engage with credible digital databases.
Now, what is the role that social media is playing? Because I've read that U.S. colleges, are saying that they check social media. Is that part of the vetting process, or should it be part of the vetting process?
It is, and I think it should be. I don't know if you're aware, but we've just had a federal election in this country over the weekend, and the traditional polls have been completely inaccurate.
We saw that in the US, yeah.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, on the day of the election, I was reading an article about, it was a story about a university professor here in Australia who has a significant data analysis centre, and he was predicting the government to be returned with a slightly increased majority based on the data analysis of social media. He had predicted through the same methodology the Trump win in America, Brexit, and then on the weekend in advance of the election, which was very interesting. And because he was actually accessing far more data points, millions of data points and information than traditional polling can do. I mean, polling organisations, ring people up or get them to respond to surveys, and they do 1,000 here and 1,000 there, whatever. Much smaller numbers. So increasingly, as the data analytics become far more sophisticated, then the access to all those data points becomes a very valuable resource for confirming, things like student credibility, things like national security issues that are becoming more and more significant in overseas student recruitment. So I think there's a big play there for data analytics, social media, and we certainly provide we don't have the capacity for those data analytics yet, but we're certainly looking to develop those in the near future, or buy that in.
But if I'm a student listening today, they might be thinking, "Oh my God, they're going to see me, doing something crazy that I posted on Instagram, and will my admission be rejected because I've done some things and posted some things on Facebook?" I mean, what sort of things would people be looking at for the admission teams on social media?
So for instance, look, we're not here to judge people's social activity. What we're looking for is corroboration that they are a genuine, credible student. So if on their social media, for instance, it's all in a local language, and there's no English in that social media, what does that tell us? Well, that means that that's not able to corroborate their English score. So it may or may not be useful for that. But if it is in English, are they talking about what they've achieved academically? Have they talked about their LinkedIn? Is their LinkedIn profile consistent
with the claims they're making in their application for study, for application for visa. It's just another area of data that can help us corroborate the students' credibility and claims for either admission or a visa. Nothing more untoward than that, really.
Fascinating. So it's been very, very informative, Andrew. Now, I do want to just ask you one last question. I mean, after the Four Corners documentary was aired, I mean, you were attacked. You were attacked by the industry pretty good. I mean, do you have any response to some of their attacks?
Well, let's see what.
Do you want to respond?
No, look, I think don't shoot the messenger. I mean, I think some of the points I made are self-evident, and if you're not going to put your hand up and say the industry's reputation is more important than and really think about how you maintain that integrity, you have to be subject to a certain amount of scrutiny, and I think there will be a follow up from from the ABC, from the channel that made the program, and let's see what else comes out. I don't think I've made any claims that I can't back up.
And my sense is that, you're kind of challenging the status quo. You're saying what we're doing needs to change.
Yeah, look,
or needs to be better.
Yeah, look, all I'm really saying is I think that the policy pendulum has swung too far back in the towards facilitation, and there are dangers when you do that, and the dangers of that will usually manifest themselves in student welfare issues. And I just want to say to institutions and to the government and to the stakeholders, these are kids' lives you're playing with. I want great outcomes for all the great students that come to the country and whichever country they go to. But don't set them up for failure, because their failures, and I think you'll see this in Canada, is where the pressure gets too much because they don't have the English or the finances to succeed. You put them in a very difficult situation.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your time. It was very informative, and I appreciate you coming onto the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me, James. It was a pleasure.
Don't forget to follow James on Instagram at Connect with James for fun photos and updates on future episodes.
That was a fascinating interview with Andrew Durston, who was featured in Cash Cows, and I hope that you enjoyed that. And one of the advantages of doing a podcast such as this is that we can do a long-form interview. And interestingly, our interview with Andrew is about the same length as the actual Cash Cow documentary, which aired in Australia. So it gives a little bit more depth to the story. It gives a little bit more information to people about Andrew and what he's doing. I know he's been attacked out there, and you can get a sense of what he is thinking and why he appeared on the show in the first place. And it's an interesting story. We will be following it, and we will be bringing on more guests who will be talking about their reaction to Cash Cow, as well as some of their findings about what is going on in the international student world, both in Australia and around the world. Now, Coming up next, we're kind of running out of time here, Stephanie, but Stephanie really wants me to go over the top 10 countries because we've got a lot of new listeners out there from different countries this week. So Brazil remains our top country. So obrigado, my Brazilian friends. Canada, number 2. Thank you, Canada. The USA was number 3. Slovakia has jumped up to number 4. Israel is number 5. Mexico, number 6. Russia, number 7, Peru, number 8, Italy, number 9, and the Netherlands, number 10. So that's quite interesting. So a few more countries are tuning into the James Rice Show. I mean, we are broadcast in over 60 countries, and we are broadcast on Apple's podcasts. iHeartRadio is our new broadcast platform, as well as Spotify and the Stitcher app. And YouTube. Don't forget YouTube. We still get a lot of listeners on YouTube. You can listen through the YouTube channels. And I hope that you guys enjoy the show, and I hope that you enjoy the content that we're bringing to you. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, and the James Rice Show, and check us out and send us a message. Okay, so if you guys have something you want to talk about, if there's a question out there that you want to ask, feel free to contact us, and we'll try to answer it during the podcast, one of the podcasts in the future. So thank you guys, as always, for your continued support, and I hope you guys have a great week, and please remember, be crazy.
Thanks for listening to The James Rice Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and send us your questions or comments at www.thejamesriceshow.com.